Hey there viewers, and welcome back to Ray of All Trades. Today's the Stihl MS310 reassembly with the clone parts, and parts have arrived. So looking through, looks like we've got a new oil pump, like air filter, buffer tube, fuel lines, fuel filters, and I'm hoping in here is, yep, carburetor. One genuine aftermarket motor assembly. It says the same ones for the 028, 029, 310, and 390. I'm curious if that means that it's actually just a big bore. Wondering if that's what actually was in this before, because it looks very similar to what burned up the first time. So that was nice of them. They gave me a new spark plug and a new decompression valve. Top L7T. That's definitely a knockoff plug if I've ever seen one. Nevertheless, we'll give it a try. Maybe not the spark plug. We'll give everything else a try. So, let's move some stuff out of my way so I can actually do some damage here. Well, let's take off the impulse line first. I think we got a new one of those. It just pulls right off. Rigid. If we've got a new one, we're going to go ahead and replace that. Impulse line is what drives your fuel supply in your carburetor. That's where the vacuum and pressure are coming from the crankcase. And on the downward stroke it generates pressure. On the upward stroke of the piston it generates vacuum. And that changing in pressures is what causes that carburetor to pump fuel. Just pulling off the intake boot. We are going to check this for leaks carefully. I know we did that in the last video, but I want to be double sure. It is the original. It has a Stihl logo on it. Vacuum leak here will cause it to run extremely lean and burn up the saw. Like I said, what I believe caused this was the factory seals that were put on, or left in, should I say, from the motor rebuild. They left the original bottom end in it, and for some reason opted to keep the seals. So we're going to need that boot, impulse line. We need this screw that I said that I put in just to make sure that I didn't lose for the ground wire. We shouldn't need the decompression valve because they gave us a new one. This saw doesn't have a whole lot of pressure. I'm not really sure why they've got a decompression valve, and if I've got a plug to blank this off, I will. The guy that owns it, pretty strong. He shouldn't have to worry about this. Came with a new air filter. I'm going to verify. I've been bitten by aftermarket air filters before that didn't quite seal properly. So we are going to verify that the replacement aftermarket filter does the job before we toss that one. Let's see, we got rid of we've got a new carburetor, so we're going to get rid of this one, put it in the box. So the motor comes assembled, but since the bolts have to come out to be able to put it back together, they've left it loose. I was kind of curious if they were going to do that, and I was going to have to break the seals and everything else, but it looks like they've already beat me to it. Yep, this one's not stamped with that number 4 on it, but what it is stamped is 290 on the bottom. And something else I'm not crazy about. Let's see if I can get you guys in focus on this. Let's see, will that focus? There's some metal shavings in the bottom of this thing from manufacturing. So I'm glad we did take it apart for quite a few reasons. We're going to clean all this out of there. If I'm signing my name to it, I definitely want it to be right. Looks fairly clean. You got the piston on the right direction. The arrow always points towards exhaust. And the bearings sound much better. And there is no play like the other one had either. 6203 bearings. CHXYXZ is the name on the bearing. Not one I'm used to seeing, but grab the calipers and take a quick measurement of this piston. 48.74 is the piston. Is at the 49 millimeter. Is called the big bore cylinder piston kit. And the 290 actually had a 46 millimeter bore. The 290, the 310, and the 390 have the same stroke, which is how far down the piston goes. And the difference is the diameter of the piston. 310/390 49 millimeter big bore kit. So, just curious why it was stamped 290. Bar stud needs to come out for that. I'm going to use a pair of vice grips and see if I can get a good grip on it. You can double nut them sometimes, and that's really the proper way. And what the heck, we'll give it a try. But yeah, I've only got not enough threads to double nut it. Not with the factory bar nuts. So let's go with second best option. And we're just going to have to make sure we get it cleaned up so that it doesn't impact anything on the bar mount, because that's where the bar rides. Grabbing as close to the end as possible. End as in the case side. Yep, you can see here it was the original bottom end. Stihl manufactured logo on it. I'll try to see if this camera has any better, but you can see where the old crankshaft was wearing the aluminum. So this, not this crankshaft, the one prior to this build. So they used the original bottom end. Like I said, the red gasket kind of gives it away. They used the original bottom end. Where they failed was that they used the original seals as well, and then tried to seal the heck out of it. But yep, original bottom end with the aftermarket top end. They took a shortcut and it bit the new owner. And I can see why. I mean, that bolt, that bar stud, was not that easy to come out of there. So chewed up the edges a little bit. We'll file those, make sure they're nice and clean. It's what the bar rides on, but the bar is only riding on it or moving on it when you're adjusting the chain. Once it's locked down, you're pinching the bar with these nuts up against the body over here. So I'm not as concerned about that. that's the only place that I found debris. I went through everything else I could find, and nothing else seems to have debris on it. It just has the oil that they assembled it with, very lightweight oil. Nevertheless, we're still going to blow some air through it, each piece as we put it together. Safety glasses are a must. Let's finish cleaning this out too. Just get the bottom end clean, that's the inside. Thought maybe I was running into a bottoming out issue. Let's verify this real quick. Oh no, plenty of room. Okay. It got tight there for a quick second, and I just wanted to verify that I wasn't causing a problem. Let's clean these threads up. Metric Harbor Freight kit comes with a nice pitch finder. Fan these out and lay it on the bolt and see which one lines up with threads. And looks like we got the 1.5 lines up perfectly with the threads. So we're looking for a tap and die that have a 1.5. According to Harbor Freight, it looks like a M10 1.5. Those threads look pretty good now. That's the die. Now we're looking for the same M10 by 1.25, excuse me, M10 by 1.5 tap. On a die, it's not that big of a deal. When you're putting a tap in, you want to drive it in a little bit. When you start feeling resistance, back it back out. Because what's happening is all the pieces of threads that you're taking out of there are ending up further down inside the hole. You bind them up. And then it'll end up breaking the tap. When you break a tap, think about it, the tap is designed to be a lot stronger material. than what you're tapping. So you go forward a little bit, backwards a little bit, forwards a little bit. I'm tapping into aluminum, so that's actually pretty easy. If I was tapping into steel, I would definitely be using like a WD-40 or some sort of a cutting oil. See all the shavings that are coming out of that? All I'm doing is cleaning out the threads. It's alright. As long as we take our time putting this thing together and making sure everything's tight the way it's supposed to be, it'll probably last a while. I mean, there's been a lot of good reviews on these big bore kits. People are running them and lots of hours of runtime, no complaints. So as long as you take your time putting it together and double checking everything, probably isn't too bad. Let's go one last time. Just thread it in easy for the first, gosh, most of the, at least half that bolt. Excuse me, I guess it's a stud, not a bolt. So thread it in easy for at least the first half of it, and then it started getting snug. So I think there was a burr somewhere, and as I was tightening it up, that burr damaged the threads either on that steel bolt or in this aluminum casting. I would venture to say that the steel must have had a bad spot on it, but that's odd because the steel bolt was original. And I guess steel could have messed up. Clear out all those shavings. Check a dry fit here. Yep, all the way in like it's supposed to. Well, since I've cleaned those threads up, we are going to use some Loctite on these threads, just to make sure it doesn't back out. I'm looking for two things here. Number one, did it get tight? In other words, did it pull that bottom of the motor tight against that casing? And number two, did that shoulder get flush with this surface? So that middle surface you want flush with that white plastic there. And okay, what we've got, see if I can zoom you guys in. So this surface right here, this surface right here, and then this surface all along here is the seal to the other side of here. So it's got a seal all along there, it's got the seal in here, and all along here, and down here. Once you're sealing, obviously this metal surface to that metal surface, but more importantly, in here, what this surface mates to is the outside of this seal right here. So you have to be able to seal up this whole perimeter, and then also this whole surface along here on both seals. So I'm going to be using some 1184. It's a gasoline resistant 3-bond. Yama Bond, Honda Bond, several manufacturers all do the exact same thing. It's a gasoline resistant sealer, and kind of expensive, 20 something bucks I think for a tube of it. Great stuff. If you're doing a baseless gasket, things like that, which effectively this is, right? There's no base gasket on here. This is the stuff you would want to use. So it does a great job of sealing, holding up to gasoline, holding up to pressure, heat, everything. I had really good luck with this stuff, but it's worth its weight in gold. Seal all this up. Then, the most important part. This can actually go in both directions. It's important to know that the crankshaft the crankshaft that connects to your clutch drum, which is this side right here, is on the clutch drum side where the chain's at. So the longer side of it goes on the side with the bars. The side with the taper goes on the side where the flywheel would be, because the flywheel is what actually connects to that taper right there. So when I go to put this in, you got to make sure you put it in the right way. Otherwise you'll be really cussing when it's time to have to redo it. So because then you had to clean up your mess that you just finished sealing. So take your time putting this together. What I like to do is, so I put a little bit on a Q-tip. I coat these outside seals. It doesn't need the quantity that you saw me take off. It just needs to be coated. What size? Those rubber seals should seal up on that motor, but I'm here to tell you the manufacturer didn't think that it was a good seal, so they put the red sealant on there. So I follow suit. If they didn't think it was a good enough seal, I agree. You know a lot more about this than I do. So there is a groove in this base. I'm making sure the sealant is all in there. And the Q-tip makes it come out of the seals a little, or out of the groove a little bit. And that's what we're looking for to mate up with that other surface. Take your time, do it right, be thorough, because a mistake here will cause a vacuum leak and it will cause you to have to put another 390 big bore kit in. A lot of people use their finger to clean that up. I like using the Q-tip. Preference thing. Anyway, it should look something similar to that. On the top end, make sure there's absolutely no debris in here. Give me 1 second. On the top end, I'm going to do the same thing. The reason why I'm not dropping the crank in immediately is because this stuff needs a couple of minutes to tack up. So go ahead and get all your sealing done. I don't have to be very thorough on this top end here because honestly I've got enough on that bottom. I am going to put a coat on there though. What you guys didn't see on camera, I took some of this brake cleaner and cleaned off these surfaces, got rid of the oil. On a lot of 2-cycle small engines, there's a taper in here. So when you're putting the piston and the rings in, you don't have to use a compression set for this style of piston because it's going to compress as you push it forward. It's actually got a taper to it, and it'll compress those rings as it's going through. So let's make sure that, again, the long side of the crank, goes through onto the bar side over here. Slide it through, careful not to put the crankshaft down until it's the right time. Drop those seals in place and make sure they line up. I like to make sure that it rotates like it's supposed to. Right. This next part I'm going to do my best to show it on camera, but I'll try to explain it anyways. So the exhaust side is the square port. The intake side is the round port. The round port goes to the back, and the exhaust side comes to the front where the muffler came off. I'm going to be using both hands to try to hold up the piston, trying to compress these rings, making sure that they're still lined up with the pins that are on this piston, and then slide this down with the other hand to make sure that I get a good fit on it. So like I said, I'll try my best to do it on camera. At least now that you know what I'm trying to do, you can see if I actually accomplished. So guys, timing is everything. I received a call that I had to take, and I couldn't leave the cylinder apart while it was in the drying stage. Otherwise, I would have ended up having to clean it all up and start back over. What I did, put the cylinder back on the top of the piston, made sure that my rings were in alignment with the pins, and you just wiggle it back and forth. Wiggle the cylinder over the piston back and forth, and it'll work its way down, and you'll actually feel it go together. Then once it's together, push it all the way down until it seats up. It's going to be, it had a little bit of a gap originally, probably because of the seals being squished together. And then I put the 4 screws through the base. So the screw goes through the base and tightens up into the cylinder itself. Tightened them up as tight as I could with a T-handle, by hand. And then did a crisscross pattern, making sure that they were tightened up. That's just an attempt to, similar to a regular head bolt on a car. You're trying to just even the torque all the way across. And that's pretty much it. Sorry about that. And so we'll continue on. Next step, while we have access to them, let's go ahead and grab these 2 ground wires. Make sure that they've got a good connection or not frayed or corroded. That was the Phillips head screw that I took out earlier. Run it through there, and then it tightens up through the bottom here. We'll make sure those wires are on the outside. Of that coil. I always wondered when I was watching videos why they don't show certain parts. I'm always saying, hey, get your hands out of the way. Now I understand where they were coming from. Just verifying that, yep, I've got the right screw on the new cylinder. It's the wrong size. Give me a second, let me find one that fits. Alright, I found a little lock washer and a screw that fits. I doubt you'll be able to see it, but I'll show you anyway. So obviously the smaller one is the one that fits this one, and the larger one fit the last one. I could drill it and tap it, but honestly, why? And it was in my parts bin, so I couldn't tell you what size it is. I can tell you it's really small and it's a fine thread. Got a lock washer on there. Get it good and tight. I should say good and snug. Impulse line on. Remember I said this one that came off of it is, it has the Stihl logo, so it's original, but it's pretty stiff. So let's throw a new one on there. That is, the cone side faces out. It goes down into, can you see? It goes down into that barb off the back side of the motor. Just push it all the way down while you can still access everything. Go ahead and get the intake boot. I did check it. I do not see any cracks at all. I'm actually impressed that it's held together so well. Usually it doesn't need lubrication to put that on. But if you are fighting with it, that is something you can try to make it a little easier. There is, you can kind of see the shape of it. You're just going to match up that shape, so it basically it's going to mount on like that. There's really no keyway on this thing to tell you when it's mounted on straight, but I can tell you if you don't have those lined up, then the carburetor screws won't sit on there properly. Looks pretty close. Let's get the clamp on. Changing this boot while this thing is all together is a chore in itself. So when you get to assemble one, when it's in pieces like this, it's kind of refreshing. Tighten that up pretty good, because like I said, it's any kind of a vacuum leak will cause you a lot of grief. Skipped a step that I did and didn't show you guys. After this is together, I do make sure that the piston moves up and down freely. And as you can see, I don't even have a flywheel or anything on here. I'm just grabbing it with my fingers and spinning the crankshaft 180 degrees or 360 degree rotation to make sure everything's working like it's supposed to. While I'm on it, the seal, when you put all this together and you've got a bunch of silicone or whatever RTV coming out of here, now would be the time to clean that off. It just gives you a professional look. Yeah, that's kind of funny. I'll show you guys something I just saw along the way here. You can see that the coil, maybe you can, maybe you can't. You can see that the coil was impacting the flywheel at one time, and that just leads me to, again, the bottom of the the bottom of the cylinder, the bottom of the motor was scored. This is scored, and I'm kind of curious. Yep, that's got rub marks as well on the flywheel. So the original motor must have come apart as far as the bearings and bounced around. It's evident it was wobbling. So something catastrophic happened on the original build. Another reason I would not have used reused those seals. Decompression valve, because I looked and I don't have a plug for this. The only thing this decompression valve does is when you, there's a little hole right here on the end. When you push that valve in, it allows air to travel in and out that hole. It just takes away some of the compression as it's building and gives you, I don't know what the percentage is, it's pretty low, but it makes the saw easier to pull over by hand. When it fires, the compression itself is enough force to close that valve that explosion that's occurring, close that valve and prevent anything else from coming out that hole. So it's a decompression valve. Saw will run in that position. If one of these is sticking, it will run that way. It just won't run great. So keep an eye on those. Those are a consumable item, cause of a whole bunch of leaks and forced saw rebuilds. That's why I don't like them that much. And if you have the strength to pull over the saw and you don't need to use a decompression valve, it's usually better not to have one. And then all you would do is just plug it with that brass cylinder plug. So it comes with a compression ring gasket on it. It is a 1/2 inch deep well socket, and it needs to be a true deep well socket, because a deep well socket that has a rib on the inside of it won't work. It won't actually go past this right here. So you need a 13mm or a 1/2 inch deep well socket that is deep well the whole way, hollow the whole way. And it's just like a spark plug. All you're doing is compressing that metal gasket. You can see I choked up on the ratchet so that I'm not giving it too much tension. Put that together. Let's go ahead and get the oil pump assembly installed. Came with a new drive gear. That's pretty cool. Oil pump assembly came with a spark plug and a fuel filter. Save those for later. There's a oil filter inside the tank. This one's actually in really good shape. And when possible, I like using the OEM parts. But so it's actually fairly easy to change. You would just reach into the oil tank, take off that filter, and I take that back. I think that filter may actually be able to pull out of that hole. Anyway, just pull this out, pop a new one on, and away you go. I want to be sure. Well, there you go. There's your oil filter, the oil filter assembly. And what I'm looking at, and the reason why I changed my mind, was that the hole on the very end, that is kind of larger. The new one versus the old one. So even though it's still very soft, it might actually be worthwhile changing this, just to make sure. I will save it though, because if this new one doesn't hold up, the old one's going right back in. Just push it on. Be very careful plugging these back in, pushing these back in with like using screwdrivers and stuff, that you don't push through it. I've got a somewhat dull flathead screwdriver here that I use for a lot of that. You ideally want to push it in. You're never going to see me doing this. Tried to zoom in so you guys can see a little bit better. You want to push, it's a circle, you're trying to push the back side because you're never going to reach that with a screwdriver, so that you can use the screwdriver to help push it in on the front side. Just because it's what you can reach. Hope that makes sense. There's not a whole lot of room there to do that. Pushing in towards the casing while I'm using the screwdriver to push that rib past the opening. Alright, that's in there. And just make sure it's flat all the way around. And then this hole, this hose, goes up through that hole right through there to the bottom of the saw. Oil pump, And this is actually an adjustable oil pump. That's kind of cool. Didn't expect that. Anyway, that's a adjustable oil pump. I believe it's open it to get more flow and close it to get less. I do want to see if it's somewhere in the middle right now. Let's see. It's actually got a detent that's holding it in this position, but it does turn both directions. I'm guessing that it's quarter turn this way is either full open and that way is full off probably. Anyway, and this appears to be in the middle. We're going to leave it there and see what it does. There is a hole in the bottom of the saw right here that I bet you lines up with that. That hose goes up on there, and I am missing the other side. I forgot a whole bucket of parts. Anyway, old oil pump, and it's got this plastic fitting. That's the one that actually goes up to the oiler up here. Set this on the ground. I need this piece out of here. Looks like a quarter turn, pulled it straight up. It's got an O-ring on it to seal it. And the mating surface up here has an O-ring as well, which is the other end of this. Let's go ahead and get this mounted on here. So it has plenty of oil on it, but we're going to use this as a lubricant and a cleaner. Make sure the inside of that's clear. Push it in and quarter turn locks it in place. We're going to push, try to do this. If I do this with hemostat, you guys might be able to see. So if I push it on here, you see, slide the oiler over the top of the crankshaft. Grab the bottom of this oil hose and put it onto the pump. Keeping in mind that you don't want to puncture that. Let's see if I can get you close so you can see. So when I push this up in here and then finish pushing this in the rest of the way so that it's centered, the bolt holes are going to line up with the casing. Then I'm going to grab this hose and I'm going to finish pulling it up the rest of the way. Alright, that's our oil pump. Center it up with the holes. I've talked about this before, but the oiler comes from the tank up that tube that we just replaced with the filter, comes up into here. The oil pump itself pumps the oil, and I'll describe that in a second, pumps the oil up here out into this square fitting all the way across to here. It goes into the body of the saw and it comes out right here. And I think this saw actually has a see this plug this plug right here on the end, if you're spitting oil out the front of the saw, this plastic plug has come out. I've seen it once before. I know it's not very often, but you catch it once and you won't forget it. Anyway, that plug right there will fall out. It's a plastic plug. Anyway, when that plug's in though, the oil will come out this groove right here, and that groove lines up with the bar depending on the chain length. Chain length can allow that bar to be sitting anywhere in here, and allows that to go into the very small hole on the bar itself. That's what lubricates the saw. The way that the pump works, this oil pump gear has threads on it. Those line up with the teeth that are on the pump right here. Spin that. What turns this is the drum. The drum itself has a groove in it, and that groove lines up like that. Well, it's actually this way, but lines up like that. So as this drum is spinning, it's turning this, which in turn turns the pump. So anytime this clutch is spinning, it's going to be turning this. And lubricating the chain. Good design. So go ahead and seat that down. Alright, so the washer goes on next, with the top facing out. Again, the top doesn't matter as far as up and down here, it means it faces out. Make sure your clutch is clean. Springs are intact. Weak springs will actually cause the clutch to slip. So this spins on in counter rotation. You want to be able to develop some compression. We'll put the spark plug in to develop compression. The compression of the saw will allow this to tighten up. Gives it just enough resistance. Some quick blasts. It's that hitting motion. When it doesn't have one of those, you use a hammer and chisel. So let's get this cleaned out. This is your clutch drum. That's cleaned out. Let's clean out the bearing. Clutch drum bearing. Using the WD-40 to clean more so than lubricate this, because we're going to put grease on it. Just a shot of grease. It goes on the end of the crankshaft. Do yourself a favor and find that wire on that pump. Mine's down in this position right now, and that will help you drastically for lining this up. This doesn't drop on pretty easy. Try putting in the bearing at the end, but that seems to drop on pretty easy. We then have the rim sprocket. Stihl logo faces out. This says 3/8 7, so it means 3/8 inch driver tooth, and 7 meaning that there's 7 teeth around this sprocket. They also sell a 3/8-8. It would be 8 teeth around that sprocket. Slides right on like that. Washer next. And then the E-clip. Keep close tabs on the E-clip because when it goes flying, it never lands where you wanted it to. Doesn't take much pressure to put it on. Anyway, these van pliers are fantastic. I don't know if anybody's ever used them or not, but they are fantastic. Love those things. Brake assembly on next. It attaches to this handle. When it engages, it grabs this band and tightens up around this clutch drum. That's what stops your chain from spinning. And as you can imagine, since it's stopped, it also would stop the oiler, right? Pretty cool design. Alright, so this open slot goes up into that tooth right there. So it's locked on that tooth. This pin goes into that groove down there. Slide it back. The spring, the fun part about this. The spring goes up here around that arm. When it's in the locked position, you have the most freedom to move that spring. So I'm pulling back on that arm. It gives me the most amount of, or lack of tension, I guess you want to call it. Use these van pliers. Grab a hold of the end of that spring, and I'm trying to get it onto that post right there. Love these van pliers. They grab a hold of everything. Anyway, verify operation. So when I pull back, it releases this band. When I push forward, it engages that band. It looks like it's supposed to. Now we need to put the cover back on. T25s. Check the brake once more once this cover's on. If you got it wrong, the spring can could be bound up because you mashed it in there. Let's go ahead and get the muffler on. Muffler was these long bolts with a square head on them. The square headed bolts drop into the grooves back here, back there, there, and there. Put the gasket on, that'll hold all the bolts in place. Just like that. Take the muffler. We're actually going to port this muffler. At the request of the owner, he wanted to see if he could get any horsepower gains out of it. And I'm going to go back and look. I know there was one that all they did was enlarge this hole. And there was another porting job where they cut out this hole. The idea, this volume of air should be no more than 70% of the volume here, right? So you can calculate this area, how big that area is. You don't want this opening to be more than 70%. You can do as much as 80, but 70 is the magic number. You don't want all of these openings to equate to more than 70% of that size hole. It needs some back pressure to work like it's supposed to, but that's a muffler porting job. when you do that, you do have to richen up the screws on the carburetor because it is pushing more air and it does change the mixture. We're going to hold off on finishing up the muffler till the very end. Okay, here's the next item to go on. I know it's for dust. But I want to say it also serves purpose for the summer and winter. You guys might have heard about. We don't really experience it here in Virginia, but the should be this valve right here allows you to move this from summer to summer mode to winter mode, and it would shut off the airflow. See if I can demonstrate. So allows the heat from the motor to escape into the carburetor area and warm up the fuel. So in winter mode you would put it on this side. In summer mode you block the heat from the motor from getting back into the fuel mixture side. So anyway, it snaps on there like that. Spark plug boot drops into that groove right there, holds it in place. Snap it back there. Alright, onto the orange cover. So here's what we're looking at. Ignition kill wires. It's going to go through this center hole right here. The bottom one, the larger of the two bottom ones. The impulse line comes through the one on the right. Impulse line is going to be this one here that's got the cone shaped hole that we changed before. Went to the bottom of the engine. This snorkel, our intake boot that we've checked, comes through this hole right here. These two detents go on either side of this, and it's a little bit of a, I don't know what you want to call it, it's got a little slant to it. Well, they'd be like a 2 o'clock position for this up here, something like that. Then your breather hole is going to come up through here. Right. I'm going to do my, and then the fuel line comes up through the larger square opening here at the bottom. So let's do the wires first. They're the longest and they have the most play. Get those in. Squeeze that grommet. Fuel line, stuff that up through next. Just be able to get access to it. It's not going to go all the way through. The impulse line, while you can still get to stuff, push it through this bottom right hole. Get a pair of pliers. Just pull it through. There's a little rib. You'll feel it pop through. Make sure your wires are fed through so that they're out of the way. Get too far and it'll mess up on you. Go ahead and get your breather line up through. And then finally, the last one you're going to work on, and that's the toughest one, is the intake boot. What I'm going to try to do is, from reaching behind it, I'm going to try to compress that circle like this, feed it through so that it can open back up on the other side of this. I'll do my best to demonstrate it. It's kind of tough. So I'm pushing in on the handle, like moving the orange casing forward while I'm compressing the intake boot with my other finger until I can get it to feed all the way through. Do what you can as far as using, your fingers to pull this through, because you don't want to tear this thing. If you end up using a screwdriver, and I usually have to, if you end up using a screwdriver, just be very cautious that you don't tear that rubber boot. Alright. Before we put that carburetor on, let's go ahead and get this front buffer tube lined up. Let's see, it's holding the casing back. I'm just going to pull back on the brake. I'm going to be pushing in. I'm going to be pushing in on this boot and pulling out on this orange plastic to try to squeeze that in there. This rib has to drop into a groove in here. So even once it's in there, you have to push it in all the way. Try to move that boot into position. There you go. Pull your wires free. This green wire drops into that groove. There's a cutout or a chase built into the plastic. You can see it, it's formed in there. It follows around. Actually, let me attach the spade clip first for the ground, because once you wrap those wires in there, it's kind of tough. And can I get the light in there so you guys can see a little bit better, I think. Okay, that's on. Wire wraps up around inside that groove and down in through that groove. And then tuck this down and back behind all of that, so it's out of the way. The black wire is going to come up this way, and actually on I think it's on the back side of this fuel line. I don't think it's supposed to be in the front. On the back side of that fuel line drops into that groove right there. Okay. Does that help? I need a new light. That one there is on its last legs. And so this brass ring, it's got two detents on it. They line up with these bolt holes. So I am getting that intake in place, and I'm shoving this brass ring on the inside. That's what keeps that intake boot formed. It makes a good seal on the carburetor. Should look something like that. Ideally, you want to make sure that when the carburetor seats, that rubber gasket seats flush. Should kind of line up with these two studs coming out of here. So I stick my thumb in there and just get it turned into place. And take this ring, it slides on the two bolts. When it pushes on, it goes completely around that black gasket. And it actually helps hold the pressure of the gasket in. So that goes on there. Making sure that this wire is out the way. So the carburetor, impulse line, fuel line, impulse line, fuel line. Those two move as you're pushing the carburetor on, so you're going to have to use a screwdriver to just help hold these in place while you're pushing these on, because you don't have an opportunity to push them on separate. It goes all in one big, one piece. So, slide those on, line up the two rubber lines, and push them on. Try to bottom it out. That goes on next. This ring, the taper is facing to the out position, so it's flat on this side, and it's got more of a cup, I guess, on this side. So if you think about it, the part that the nut goes on is going to be flat. You're not bending metal when you're tightening it up. Choke up on the ratchet so you don't get it too tight, but make sure both carburetor nuts are evenly tightened. Just the feel of how tight you're making them. So make sure that they're tightened up. We're going to put in our master control switch, I think Stihl calls it. So it this metal tab right here has to go under this when you're putting it in, and this part of the bar goes into that hole at the very beginning. So make sure that that lines up in there. So drop it into that side first, and then I pull it out and push under this brass kill switch. Push it in all the way that way, not all the way, until it lines up with this groove right here. So once it's inside that groove and it's evenly spaced, snap it down. So this brass should be up above, and that should be in. The wire snaps into, actually I take that back, goes into this groove first. So put the wire in and then slide this brass part of the wire in as far as it'll go. What you're trying to line up is this part of the brass needs to be able to contact this tab. That's your kill switch. So it's not going to go all the way in, but it will go most of the way in. The remainder of that wire snaps into this groove right here on the master control switch. All right. I'm going to take the throttle control lever. The part with the hook on it goes up into the carburetor and then down. So it makes a hook like that so that it finishes up in that shape. So I'm hooking it into the throttle lever. So I made a circle. I'm going to squeeze. So now I'm looking at this part of the wire. I'll squeeze the throttle until this is visible. Snap it in there and push down. Make sure that functions. Now check your master control switch. So pull the trigger. This should go all the way down until the choke closes. Alright, let go of the trigger. You would pull start it. Once it pops one time, all Stihls are this way. Once it pops once, like tries to start, bring it up one click, which opens up the choke but keeps it on fast idle. Start it. Once it starts, you would squeeze, now watch this control lever when I squeeze the trigger. When I squeeze the control lever, this is going to pop up one more turn. That's the run position. You'll use the saw as normal. When you're done, all the way up is the kill switch. Anyway, that's the function. Let's finish getting these buffer tubes installed. So there should be 3 screws on this side of the handle. One goes through here, one goes through here, and one goes through here. They line up with here, here, and here. Just going to tie the orange part to the white part. While we're here, let's go ahead and put these 2 caps on. And then we have one more down here. This is another T27. Goes down to that part of the handle. Another plug. Okay. Let's finish this on this carburetor area. I'm going to take your breather hose. It's going to snap onto the breather. Okay. We're going to be pushing these onto the carburetor adjustment screws, and then once we've got it on all those 3, we're going to slide it into this groove on the plastic. Man, this is going to be a long video. Flywheel on. I never pulled the coil loose. However, I still want to gap it. Alright, so let's line up the flywheel with, there's a key in there. So you'll feel it drop down in. Takes the bolt with the shoulder on it, excuse me, the nut with the shoulder on it. It's a 1/2 inch or 13 millimeter, and it goes on clockwise to tighten. Again, we're using the resistance of the saw, the compression resistance of the saw, as our short bursts seem to do pretty well for that. A lot of people will tell you to put Loctite on that. I've never been a fan of putting Loctite on there. I'm sure at some point it's going to bite me, but to be honest, it's not going to fly off. It's going to stay within the recoil starter if something does come loose. But the flip side is, if I've got Loctite on there, there's a pretty good chance it's going to get down into the inside of it, and I'm going to have that much harder of a time getting that flywheel off the next time. So I'm not convinced either way. So I've never had one come loose, but I'm sure my time is coming. Let's go ahead and gap this coil while we've got it. So I'm just going to loosen up the 2 T27s, drop a business card in that coil, line up my magnet, push the coil against the business card for my gap so that it's evenly spaced. Remember there was 2 pieces to the coil. Go ahead and tighten it down. And to free it up, you can't pull that business card out, so what I do is I just turn the flywheel so that the magnet's out of the way. I knew you guys were going to say something. So it's all cleaned up. Drop that starter cover on. If it doesn't fall in just like that, just give it a couple of tugs on the cord and it'll drop right in. It's because the teeth happen to, or the dogs happen to line up. Drop all these in. It is going into plastic, so be careful. One of the pieces you put in was a sleeve for that chain brake. Make sure it still moves. If you did it wrong, that might be stuck. So keep that in mind. Let's go ahead and take a look at that brand new air filter that they gave us and see how it matches up. Oh, it looks identical. It's probably because this was already an aftermarket, but so there is a spot on here that connects back to that carburetor. I'm trying to remember if that is a basically extra air when you're at wide open throttle. I think it's what it is. Evenly tightened. Make sure it doesn't bind anything. All this is still working like it's supposed to. Spark plug boot while we're here. Go ahead and fasten it on. Make sure it's tight. Put this thing together. Most people would have tried to start it before they got this far along, just to make sure it was going to run, but I have confidence. I have high hopes anyway. How about that? Lock the cover in place. Actually, I will use a small file on that because I'm going to hit those front edges. Here's our chain guide. That in place. Snap it in place. Not to be confused with the adjuster. And this is called a chain catch, right? If the chain comes loose, it's supposed to grab that instead of wrapping around your leg. Really good to have. I was missing one extra screw right there. So it was actually 4 on this side of the handle. Y'all are probably yelling at me and I didn't hear you. And I've got 2 more here at the bottom of the handle. Clean this up with a very, very small rat tail file, or excuse me, a triangle file. Seem to fit on okay. So ideally, once we start it, one of the things that you do want to look for when you first get it running is make sure that it starts pumping oil up out of here. But before you even put your bar and chain on, if you can make sure it's pumping some oil up out of there, You don't have to run it long. As long as this clutch is spinning, that will be pumping oil. So make sure it starts spitting oil up out of here, and it won't come flying out, it's more of a trickle. It starts oozing out of there. Once it does, then go ahead and put your bar and chain on, and then put this cover on. The cover goes on just like that. Just assembling it so I can focus my attention on this muffler, and that will be for a different video, or we'll do it off camera, one of the two. Like I said, we're going to clean this up and do a quick muffler mod on it and see if we can get a little bit of horsepower gain out of it. See, so anything that falls into that in this area will work as far as air getting out, and then you do have to open up this area just a little bit because everything is a restriction for it. Again, you don't want to exceed 70% of that opening right there. So it's calculation. The motor needs some back pressure to function properly. So I'll work on that, get cleaned up, and I'll meet you guys back here. So the paint's drying. Took those two slots, opened them up just a little bit to make one larger opening. And then on this plate, I cut off that bent part. It's going to open it up a little bit. By doing this, it actually allows you to put the arrestor screen back in. Anyway, I usually put a high temp stove paint on these, like for a wood stove, and that seems to stop a lot of the rusting from all the fresh cutting. Anyway, we'll let this dry overnight, finish putting it back together tomorrow, and we'll do some test cuts with it. This is all ringing a bell. It's pretty well clogged. I'm going to clean this out. The way I'm going to do it, I'm going to clamp this in a vise, use a propane torch, heat it up, pretty much cherry red, and honestly most of the time it'll clean itself, but after heating it up, and if not, I'm just going to hit it with a wire brush, similar to this brass brush, but you can see just normal cleaning will take some of it off, but not all of it. So heating it up generally burns most of that off of there. The other thing, the porting that I took and painted and everything, just an opening in the muffler, just opened it up a little bit. The new opening shows about 35.5 millimeters by about 7.31 millimeters. Sorry about that. I'll do some calculations. The original opening of the old cylinder was 27.47 millimeters by 17.78 millimeters, roughly. And like I said, I'll do the math on it. I know that I'm under the 70% value, and I've had really good luck running it that way, but like I said, 70% is the ideal magic number if you wanted to push the saw as hard as you possibly could. So let me get this screen cleaned up, get this muffler back mounted again. There we go, that's considerably better. You can see through it pretty well, and the screen's still intact. That'll focus. It goes on just like that. Just like that. So there's a spark arrestor screen inside. And more important than ever to have a spark arrestor screen on these when you open them up like that, because there's a pretty good chance that something would fly out. You will see sparks fly out of a machine. Most people use them during the daylight hours so they don't notice it. Okay, let's gaskets in place. Slide your exhaust bolts through the muffler. Park arrestor screen next. And your cover. Washer on each one. You don't have to over tighten these things, but they do try to vibrate loose. Just evenly tighten them. When you're buying these big bore kits, you'll see in there, there's a section that allows you to buy replacement exhaust studs. I think they're pretty cheap. So if you snap one off when you're disassembling, just make sure you add that to your to buy. I'm going to gas this thing up, oil it, and verify it starts and runs. Make sure that it oils. Then I'll go ahead and put a bar and chain on it and do my adjustments while I'm cutting. Keep in mind, when you're running this, when you're testing it, if the bar cover is off, this E-clip is all that's holding this on, and if it spins loose, there's nothing to stop it. So generally, if I'm running it with it loose, it's pointing away from me, and if it has an opportunity to rev high, my face is away from it. So I don't come back and look at it until after I hear it wind down, or I shut it off, and then look and make sure that I've got oil present here. If I do, then I know I'm good and it's oiling. Then I'll go ahead and put a bar and stuff on there. Otherwise, it's pretty difficult to tell if it's oiling properly. A lot of the newer bar oils have so much thickness or viscosity to them that they won't fly off the bar and chain like everybody's used to seeing, where you would rev it up against something and you would see it splash off of there. So it's better to look and see, am I actually getting oil to the bar? Let me gas and oil this thing up.
Huh?